In December 1945, a botanist climbing a remote New Zealand island found a tree that had no business being alive. It clung to a single rock face, out of reach of the goats that had stripped the whole island bare. It looked like a survivor. Then scientists examined it and realized the truth was far worse. The tree was female, and there was no male anywhere on Earth. By the rules of biology, this species was already finished. It just hadn't died yet. This is the true story of the only one left alive. To understand this tree, you first have to understand the island that nearly destroyed it. The Three Kings Islands lie off the northern tip of New Zealand. Despite their small size, they hold plants and animals found nowhere else on Earth, the product of millions of years of isolation. That kind of separation makes a place extraordinary. It also makes it fragile. In 1889, the New Zealand Marine Department released 4 goats onto the island. The idea was simple and, at the time, seemed sensible. If a ship wrecked on the rocks, stranded sailors would have something to eat. But the island had no predators and only a limited amount of land. The plants there had never had to survive grazing, and they had no time to adapt to it. The goats multiplied at a rate almost hard to picture. By 1946, the 4 original animals had become a herd of around 390. They ate their way through the island's plant life. By the time botanists came to study what was left, nearly 50 plant species on the island had vanished locally. The only survivors were out of reach. This is the setting for the discovery. In December 1945, botanist Jeff Bayliss was surveying the island when he found a tree that stood out immediately. It was growing high on a steep scree slope of grey wacky boulders, more than 200 meters up, so treacherous that even goats wouldn't risk it. That was the only reason it was still alive. The tree had 4 trunks, and its leaves resembled those of karaka, a familiar New Zealand tree. And this tree was not the only survivor. On the same expedition, Bayliss found another plant, the Three Kings vine, reduced to a single wild specimen. One island, 1 week, 2 species each hanging by a thread. It told him this was not bad luck for one tree. It was the whole living fabric of the island coming apart. He collected samples and sent them to Walter Oliver, director of the Auckland Museum. In 1948, Oliver described the tree as a new species, but he placed it in the wrong plant group. The reason for the mistake was simple. On the island, Bayliss had collected only flowers, no fruit. It was the fruit that would have revealed which family the tree actually belonged to. Bayliss had anticipated this risk even before the expedition. That classification error would linger for a long time. In 1970, the botanist Herman Slumer concluded that the Three Kings tree was nothing special at all. Bayliss disagreed. He argued that a pressed herbarium sheet cannot show you everything. It doesn't reveal the way flowers grow straight out of bare old wood. In 1977, he published a formal defense, and in 2002, a full revision of the group finally settled it. Bayliss had been correct all along. While botanists argued over what to call it, the tree's real problem never changed. The species turned out to be dioecious. Male and female flowers grow on separate trees. To make fertile seed, you need both a male and a female tree. And on the entire planet, only one individual existed. It was female. Bayliss described it as a solitary and barren tree. Its flowers looked complete, but the pollen they made was malformed and could not fertilize anything. Year after year the tree flowered and set no seed. The goats had been the visible enemy. But the thing that now threatened to end the species was quieter. The tree had escaped the goats by clinging to a slope nothing could climb. But being alive and being able to survive as a species are 2 very different things. The difficulty was fundamental. A single tree of a dioecious species is a dead end. Every season it would bloom with white flowers, and every season those flowers would wither. Bayliss did what he could. He couldn't create a mate, but he could try to keep the tree itself going. In his garden, one broken-off sucker took root and grew. That was encouraging, but getting cuttings to strike from the canopy of the tree proved impossible. It failed at Mount Albert, and it failed in New Plymouth. Running out of ideas, Bayliss asked George Smith, a chief propagator, what else could be done. Smith's answer was blunt. Cut the tree down. He was confident he could root shoots from the trunk itself. The only question was whether they would appear at all. It was a risk, but the tree had 4 trunks. Baylis cut one. A year later, shoots appeared on the cut trunk, exactly as Smith had predicted. The survival of the individual tree was now beyond doubt. Baylis happened to be aboard a naval vessel as a guest, and that ship was headed for New Plymouth. The cuttings got an express delivery. Smith rooted them, and those cuttings became the source of an entire generation of clones, genetically identical copies of that single tree on the scree slope. In cultivation, the clones proved surprisingly hardy. They tolerated wind, drought, and even light frost. But here, the story hit its wall. The hardiness of a mature tree and the capacity to reproduce are 2 different things. The second would remain unsolved for decades. The years followed, slow and grinding. Others tried a different route. They crossed the tree with a mainland relative, Kaikomarco. But a hybrid is no longer the species that Baylis had found. It solved the problem by replacing the tree with something part other. That was reproduction through loss. It kept a version alive while letting the original species slip away. So by the time Baylis was gone, the picture was strange and frustrating. There were now clones of the tree growing in more than one place, perfect genetic copies of the original on its cliff. Every one of them was alive, and every one of them still could not do the single thing that would actually save the species, which was to make a new tree of its own. He watched it bloom, and then he watched those flowers wither away with no fruit at all. What kept pulling at Beaver was the gap between all that flowering and the total failure to fruit. In December 1983, Beaver began a careful experiment at the research centre at Mount Albert. The tree's problem, he suspected, was not only that most of its pollen was malformed, it was that the tree kept dropping its own flowers before anything could come of them. So he pollinated the flowers by hand, and then treated them with a plant hormone called auxin. It worked. For the first time in known history, the tree set ripe fruit. Each one was purple and contained a single viable seed. 40 years after discovery, the species could make fertile seed. Beaver germinated 3 seedlings. But a breakthrough is not a quick result. Every new tree needed 4 to 5 years before it could flower and fruit on its own. Around the same time, in 1989, something happened on the island. For the first time on record, the wild tree itself appeared to set viable fruit, likely through a rare chance self-pollination. One of the seedlings Beaver raised was named Martha. In the early 1990s, Martha began fruiting entirely on her own, with no hand pollination whatsoever. This was its own turning point. A species that for 40 years could not produce a single seed without human help, now had an offspring capable of reproducing completely on its own. Martha became living proof. Getting the tree back onto its island was a separate challenge. Before any seed could be returned, it had to be screened for disease, especially Phytophthora, the organism behind the Irish potato famine. On an island full of unique species, a single contaminated boot could wipe out more than one tree. By 2012, more than 100 young trees had been planted on the islands. In 2019, Martha's descendants were entrusted to the Northern Iwi Ngati Kuri. They now help care for the species, restoring a link between the tree and the people whose homeland it belongs to. Sheridan Waitai describes the tree as part of the fabric of life for her people, and says that every species that disappears is a tear in that fabric. There is a harder truth underneath. Every tree alive today descends from that one female on the cliff. They are almost the same plant. That sameness is a danger. One disease could move through the whole population. And on the island itself, the cliffs are battered by storms. The birds that would normally spread its seed, the kareru, are only slowly recovering. A self-sustaining wild forest is still a long way off. The wild population is still exactly one tree. The original still stands on its steep scree slope, the only wild individual of its species on the planet, despite decades of propagation. The species is still classified in the highest threat category, and critically endangered on the international red list. Thousands of young trees in gardens do not change that. The tree Baylis found in 1945 is still there. Everything changed around it. The goats were removed, the botanists came and went. Eventually, a mycologist with a hormone solution gave the species a future. But the original tree never moved. It didn't need to become something else to survive. It just needed enough time and enough people who refused to let one lonely flower be the end of the story.